I was 10 minutes from home, radio low, truck full of dust and cattle paperwork, when I slammed the brakes like I'd just seen a ghost. And in a way I had. Right across the trail my great-granddad cut with a shovel and a stubborn mule was a brand-new iron fence. 6 feet of HOA arrogance, gleaming like they ordered it straight out of the suburban siege starter kit. And there, like a bad plot twist, stood Darla Whitmore, president of Silverwood Glen, pearl necklace clipboard, and 2 private guards, pretending they were guarding the Pentagon, not Prairie. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, back porch, pickup truck, or HOA Warzone. If you're into real-deal stories with wild twists, sweet revenge, and enough HOA drama to raise your blood pressure, go on and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode, let's just say fences ain't the only thing getting torn down. You don't want to miss what's about to hit. Now let me explain something real quick. That trail's been on Tate land since Calvin Coolidge was president. My grandpa dragged cattle through it, my daddy drove through it, and I taught my daughter to ride her first horse along it. We don't have sidewalks out here. We've got stories etched in dirt. And this woman was trying to white out 4 generations with a contractor and a chain-link fence. I asked her, "You got a permit to dam a spring?" She blinked like I'd asked her the square root of barbecue. Our survey says this is community land now. That spring's been flowing longer than HOA bylaws have existed. What Darla didn't know: my name's Harlan Tate, and I wasn't raised to fold when somebody messes with your fence line. Or your bloodline. My daughter June saw the whole thing. She met me back at the house, phone in hand, eyebrows raised. "Dad, she's been here before," she said. "I recorded her last month. Said something about turning the trail into a yoga lawn." Yoga? Lawn. On a trail where we buried dogs, delivered calves, and fixed busted axles in the rain. I laughed, but it came out more like thunder. My land doesn't bend for yoga mats. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched that fence from my window like it was a ticking bomb, counting down to something bigger. I thought of my late wife, Nora, who once said, "You don't own land, Harlan. You borrow it from your children." June's light was still on at midnight, probably uploading that video, and I realized we weren't just ranchers anymore. We were in a cold war with a homeowners association that thought paperwork could overpower truth. Oh yeah, she thought she could fence me out with some dollar store gate and a fake smile, but what she didn't know? My great-granddad didn't just leave me dirt, he left me leverage. Buried in this soil is more than history, it's evidence, it's intent. And it's about time someone reminded the HOA that land out here has a longer memory than their bylaw. You ever hear someone tell you with a straight face that your great-grandfather's cattle trail doesn't exist because it's not on their PDF? That's the level of bold we're dealing with. The day after Darla Whitmore declared war on my family's land with a clipboard and a fake smile, I called the one man who knew our boundary lines better than the back of his own hand. Hank Brody. Retired county surveyor, neighbor for 40 years, and the only guy who can still fix a fence post with a whiskey bottle and a socket wrench. When he pulled up in his '89 Ford, he didn't even take the keys out before growling, "Show me where she lied." If you've ever seen an old man sniff out survey fraud like a hound on a hot trail, you know why I didn't blink. Hank walked the fence line with me, squinting at stakes, kicking dirt, muttering to himself like he was rewinding time. He stopped at the creek where Darla's new fence dammed the natural flow, water pooling like it was staging a rebellion. "She's screwed," he said, dead serious. "That's a protected flow. She can't divert it without a hearing." Just like that, we had our first leverage, environmental law, but I wasn't celebrating yet, because that morning I'd gotten a flyer from Silverwood Glen. They planned to extend that fence right into my north pasture, and if they did, they'd cut off the spring that watered half my herd. Losing that wouldn't just be inconvenient, it'd be lethal to my operation. I needed backup. Not legal, not muscle, historical. So I drove into town and found Laurel Grant, our county archivist, and, back in high school, the only girl who ever beat me at debate. She still wore her hair in a tight bun and her glasses like armor, but her voice softened when I said, It's Harlan. They're trying to steal the trail. Her brow furrowed so hard it looked like a fault line. Darla Whitmore came in last month, she said, only copied the pages she liked. Laurel pulled out a box older than either of us and laid it on the desk. Let's find what she skipped. And that's when I knew Darla wasn't just bending the truth. She was folding it, stapling it, and calling it a master plan. If you're still with me, keep going, because this is where it gets wild. 3 hours in, Hank hollered from the corner like he'd struck gold. "It's not missing," he said, waving a dusty file. "It's misfiled." Inside was the original deed transfer from the Carver family to the Tates, and wouldn't you know it, a permanent easement was granted for livestock passage across that very trail. It was right there in black and white, signed in 1942, with wording so clear even Darla's lawyers couldn't wiggle around it. But here's the kicker. It referenced an attached exhibit with hand-drawn boundary notations. And you guessed it, that page wasn't in the county file. It was never scanned, never digitized. Which meant, if it still existed, it was probably in the one place Darla hadn't looked. My attic! That night, I climbed those rickety stairs like I was hunting treasure. June followed close, flashlight in hand, muttering, "Mom would have had this filed by scent." She wasn't wrong. Nora could find a lost calf in a snowstorm blindfolded. We dug through boxes of tax records, saddle catalogs, and family photos until I hit the one tin box that practically whispered, "Open me." On the lid, Grandpa's handwriting, "In case of fools." Inside was the missing page, old as sin, drawn in ink that had survived wars and weather. The easement was illustrated with landmarks no GPS could deny. The bent cottonwood by the spring, the triple stone stack at the ridge. June looked up and grinned. I think we just found the map to end her fairy tale. And just as I let that sink in, headlights lit up the driveway, and the sheriff stepped out, envelope in hand. "Evening, Harlan," he said, eyes apologetic. "Got a formal complaint from Silverwood Glen. Said you're trespassing on their future green space." He handed me the paperwork like it was poison. "Don't damage the fence, or it gets messy." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because as he turned to leave, I looked down at the paper in my hand, and back at the deed in my daughter's. And I knew then, we weren't just standing on family land. We were standing on evidence, and Darla had no clue what was about to hit her. It started with a rumble, not the kind that comes from thunder or angry neighbors, but the low, mechanical kind that makes your bones tighten before your brain catches up. I walked out to find a massive excavator crawling across my lower field, churning through an acre of alfalfa like it was disposable. The driver, some poor guy just following orders, waved like this was routine. "Prepping for drainage improvements," he shouted over the engine. Behind him were 2 men in security gear with arms crossed and expressions so blank they might have been mannequins. And just like that, my crops were dust, courtesy of Darla Whitmore and her HOA wrecking crew. If this was their version of diplomacy, I wondered what war looked like. By the time I flagged them down and demanded to know what they were doing, Darla rolled up in her SUV like the queen of asphalt. She stepped out, surveyed the damage with all the regret of someone mispronouncing your name at a cocktail party. "Oops," she said. "Was this your field?" Then came the kicker. "Our survey says this falls within our easement. Misunderstanding, I'm sure." She turned to leave before I could even respond, tossing a line over her shoulder like a threat disguised as Southern charm. "Should have taken Rich's offer, Mr. Tate. That was the nice version." I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the pool of water rising from the torn-up ground, as if the earth itself had decided it had had enough. That night, the flood came. A real one. The diverted creek, thanks to their fence and that backhoe, had nowhere to flow but sideways, and sideways was straight into Silverwood Glen's pristine construction zone. Their future clubhouse, now sitting in a brand new marsh. If you ever wanted to see poetic justice delivered by irrigation, that was the moment. And just when I thought the universe couldn't script it any better, June's video hit 50,000 views by dawn. Footage of Darla saying yoga lawn while staring at our cattle trail had gone full wildfire. Turns out, nothing spreads faster than hypocrisy caught on camera. Except maybe rainwater. And just like that, our little fence fight went regional. That morning, I met Sarah Lang, who introduced herself as an environmental engineer and the newest resident of Silverwood Glen. "I didn't move here for this HOA drama," she said, boots muddy and clipboard firm in hand. Sarah had been watching from the sidelines, but now the flood brought her in full tilt. "They've violated 3 county codes," she told me flatly, pointing to erosion lines and redirected runoff. "This isn't just wrong, it's illegal." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. Not celebration, hope. Because when experts start raising eyebrows, folks start paying attention. Especially the kind who wear suits and carry lawsuits in leather folders. The next blow didn't come from a backhoe or a fence. It came in an envelope. Darla's lawyer, Richard Prescott, hand-delivered an offer. They'd buy my land for 20% under market value, a generous exit strategy, he called it, considering the legal pressure you're under. I slid the paper back across the table without looking at the number twice. "Tell Darla," I said, "I don't sell my inheritance for clearance rack prices." He smiled, a little too long. "That was the nice version," he repeated, as if the phrase came with a patent. But what hit hardest came hours later, when I called the auction house to sell Thunder, my prize bull, grand champion, 3-time blue ribbon winner, best genetics in the county, but court filings don't accept livestock. Legal defense costs hay, and hay wasn't growing in my wrecked field. When I loaded Thunder into the trailer, I swear, he looked at me like he knew. Some days, the price of standing your ground ain't just dollars. It's dignity. The first time I met Elliot Rains, I figured he was just another HOA board type. Quiet, well-dressed, and allergic to dirt. Turns out the man had more conscience than credentials, and a front-row seat to Darla Whitmore's private circus. He caught up with me at the diner one morning, eyes darting like a man looking for a conscience in a crowd. "Mr. Tate," he said, "can we talk?" Not as neighbors. As citizens. That's how I knew he wasn't just a defector. He was a whistleblower with receipts, and I was all ears. Because when the people who built the machine start passing you the blueprint, it usually means something's about to break. Over 2 cups of coffee and a plate of cold hash browns, Elliot laid it out. Darla's plan was simple, dirty, but simple. She was fast-tracking a clubhouse build on my north pasture, using adverse possession laws to claim it. "She knows it won't hold in court," Elliot said, "but she's banking on you not having the money to last that long." Then he handed me a flash drive like it was a ticking bomb. "Board meeting audio," she says, and I quote, "Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when the other party's broke." My blood boiled slow. You don't need a legal degree to understand what that meant. She was gambling I'd fold before the truth had time to stand up. I thanked Elliot and took the flash drive straight to Gerald Watson, my retired judge and now part-time legal artillery. He listened, lips thin as barbed wire, then nodded. "That's what we call premeditated fraud." But words weren't going to cut it this time. We needed weight, something physical, something undeniable. And just like that, I remembered the triple stone stack my granddad had told me about. He called it the corner that don't move, said it marked the east boundary clear as the sunrise. So I grabbed a shovel, called Chuck, and we dug like our lives depended on it, because out here, they kind of do. And buried just under the topsoil, wedged like a secret history, was the stone. Old, weather-worn, but right where it was supposed to be. Darla's new fence ran right across it like she thought time was optional. When we shared the news, Sarah Lang nearly cried. "This changes everything," she said, taking photos, tagging GPS, and calling 2 environmental lawyers before I'd even washed the dirt off my hands. Word spread faster than a barn fire in July. Soon enough, neighbors who'd once kept quiet were bringing casseroles and copies of their own records. Even a few Silverwood Glen folks flipped sides, quietly admitting they'd been sold a dream built on stolen ground. Truth has a gravity to it, and the moment that stone came out of the dirt, you could feel the shift. The land spoke. People listened. That week, Andrea Willis from the State Attorney General's office called. "We've reviewed the documents and the footage," she said, "and we're opening a formal investigation. No dramatics, no politics, just that cold, professional tone that tells you someone real just entered the room." I hung up and looked out across the trail where it all began. Funny thing about history, it doesn't argue. It waits, and when it shows up, it doesn't whisper. It rolls like thunder, steady and slow, just loud enough for everyone to hear what comes next. By the time we pulled up to the Willow Creek Town Hall, the parking lot looked like a rodeo and a PTA meeting had collided. Folks I hadn't seen in years were leaning on pickup trucks, sipping gas station coffee, whispering like something sacred was about to go down. June was already live streaming, her phone clipped to her jacket like it was her badge. "We've got 400 people watching, Dad," she said, eyes sharp. "And local news just picked up the feed." I nodded, adjusted my collar, and looked at Chuck. "Let's see if the truth can still clear a room." Darla Whitmore opened the meeting like she was launching a real estate infomercial. "Silverwood Glen," she said, pacing the front like a home shopping host, "isn't just a community. It's the future of Willow Creek. Progress, safety, increased property values. These are what we bring." Her team stood behind her like Secret Service agents guarding a parade float. Then came the maps. Big, shiny, laminated monsters that showed GPS lines, phase expansions, and a clubhouse dropped right on top of my pasture like a garnish. "Mr. Tate's claims," she said with a rehearsed smile, "are based on outdated hand-drawn maps and folklore." I smiled right back, 'cause folklore was about to bring the house down. When they called my name, I didn't bring a slideshow, I brought a box. From it I pulled the original deed, the easement map, the environmental violation reports, and then, the crowd leaned in, Ben Carver's family Bible. "My grandfather bought this land from Ben's grandfather," I said. "And they didn't shake hands on that deal, they stacked stones. Literal ones." Ben stood up slowly, 80 years old and still straighter than most men half his age. "That boundary stone still stands today," he said. "It was placed by two men who understood what integrity meant, long before HOA boards and zoning tricks." You could feel the room shift, like the oxygen had finally come back. June's livestream was popping off. Comments pouring in from across the state, some from other ranchers, others from folks who'd lost land to schemes like this. Then Andrea Willis stepped forward. The room went dead quiet. "On behalf of the State Attorney General's office," she said, unfolding a crisp white document, "we are serving a formal cease and desist order against any further development activities by the Silverwood Glen HOA, pending the outcome of a fraud investigation." You could hear Darla's composure crack. Somewhere between her clenched teeth and her crushed PR smile, she hissed, "You've made a powerful enemy, Mr. Tate." I looked her in the eye. So did you. The vote that followed was quicker than expected. HOA members, many of whom had never said two words to me, stood up one by one and voted Darla out. Elliot Raines was named interim president, with applause that sounded like thunder in a tin barn. Folks came up after, shaking my hand, patting June's shoulder, asking for copies of the deed like it was the Declaration of Independence. But I wasn't thinking about celebration. I was thinking about the next morning. Because something told me Darla wasn't done yet. And if I knew anything about land, it always remembers who tried to steal it. They took it down at sunrise. No ceremony, no press, no HOA speeches. Just a county truck, a backhoe, and the sound of metal hitting gravel as the fence that started it all finally came down. Chuck and I stood with coffee in hand, watching it unravel like a bad idea finally giving up. The creek, which had been bottled up for months, broke free like it had been holding its breath, flowing through the pasture with a kind of grace you don't usually see in lawsuit. "Funny," Chuck muttered. "Water seems to know where it belongs." I nodded, because so do people. eventually, especially when they're handed the truth in black and white and stone. Under Elliot's leadership, Silverwood Glen did a full 180. The clubhouse project scrapped, the bylaws rewritten to include historic land protections. HOA meetings now had more flannel than neckties, and someone even put a picnic table next to the old cattle trail. June started calling it the healing bench. She also started something else, a youth conservation crew, half ranch kids, half Silverwood teens, all out there restoring the trail, replanting along the creek, and documenting the work like they were building the National Archives. They even put up signs explaining the easement's history and how the land had been reclaimed without a single bulldozer. June's name was on the bottom of every placard. I asked her once why she did it. She shrugged and said, "Some stories deserve to be harder to erase." Word spread fast. A few months later, I got a call from the State Zoning Commission. Turns out, they wanted someone with first-hand experience balancing rural tradition and modern development to sit on their advisory panel. I laughed and said, "Y'all know I still do my budgeting on a feed calendar, right?" But they didn't care. So I went. Not because I wanted a new title, but because I knew what it meant when a man doesn't speak up in time. Nora used to say, if you want to shape the future, make sure it's built on what's true. I brought my boots to that first meeting, just so the concrete floors wouldn't forget where I came from. That spring, we held a barbecue on the trail. First one in years. Folks from both sides of the fence literally showed up. Someone even brought a cake that said "No more surveys." We laughed, we argued about brisket, and we watched our kids walk the path their grandparents once cleared by hand. June wore a denim jacket covered in soil stains and honor roll pins. During cleanup, a state representative pulled her aside and asked if she'd speak at the Youth Environmental Summit in D.C. "Me?" she asked. "I'm just a ranch kid." "Exactly," he said. She looked over at me, a little stunned, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage without choking up. Because you never really know what seeds you've planted until they start showing up in places you never expected. That evening, June and I rode the trail together, just us, the horses, and the sound of spring water running like it used to. At the spot where Darla's fence once split the land, we dismounted. There, mounted on a cedar base, stood the old boundary stone, clean, sealed, and inscribed with one phrase, June's words, "Tradition supports the future." She traced it with her fingers like it was both a prayer and a promise. I looked out over the pasture, the creek, the open sky that hadn't changed since my grandfather's time, and for the first time in a long while, I exhaled. Not because the fight was easy, but because it mattered. And that was it. No gavel bang, no fireworks, just a father and daughter riding home under a sky big enough to hold 3 generations of grit, and a story strong enough to outlast any fence. I didn't win back my land with lawyers alone. I won it because the truth had roots. Roots my grandfather planted, my wife nurtured, and my daughter now carries forward. The trail we fought for? It wasn't just dirt and hoofprints. It was proof that what we inherit isn't always money or metal. It's memory and meaning and the right to say, this is ours and it matters. We didn't just defend property. We protected a principle that legacy doesn't wear a suit and history isn't up for resale. We showed that progress isn't real if it erases what's sacred, and that even the most polished HOA plan can't outshine a boundary stone carved by hands that came before us. And in the end, the most valuable thing I ever passed on to my daughter wasn't a ranch. It was the lesson that quiet people, when pushed too far, make noise that echoes for years. So if this story hit something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a fight you're still fighting, I want you to do 3 things. First, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what your boundary stone is. Second, smash that like button if you believe that truth should outlive paperwork. And third, subscribe, because the next story, it's about a neighbor who chopped down my 100-year-old oak tree. Let's just say he forgot to check who planted it and what kind of roots were waiting underneath. This has been your weekly dose of justice, jokes, and jaw-dropping HOA drama. I'm Harlan Tate, and you've just ridden the trail with me. Let's ride again next week.